Now, the first seminar is How Critical Elements Make Up Our Modern World. That was led by Eric Shelter, Professor of Chemistry, and Marta Guran, Managing Director of the Center for Sustainable Separation of Metals, with which Eric works. And the coordinator was Maya Bagat from the Franklin Learning Center. The person delivering the presentation will be Ariel Koff from the Science Leadership Academy Middle School.
Well, I'm Ariel Koff. I teach 7th and 8th grade science at SLA Middle School over in West Philly. I have a background for many years as an art teacher, so it's been an exciting journey to develop my content knowledge about these subjects. So to start, we learned about critical metals this year, and wow, are they important? So we have some varying approaches to the content. One person had the great idea of designing museum exhibits in their classroom. Someone else is doing a social media competition where students are educating others and the most views wins. Another is examining solutions ramifications with a lot of inquiry. And I'm going to be tracing the metals from the source to our homes. And another fellow is investigating aerospace alloys in the classroom. So to start, we're going to be talking with our students about metals properties. They're conductive of heat and electricity. They're malleable, so they can be mashed down. They're ductile, so they can be flexible, and they're very reflective. Rare earth metals have an electron structure that gives them unique characteristics like a high heat tolerance, and also some of them are very magnetic. Not all rare earth elements are actually rare, and not all critical metals are rare earth elements. But what makes them critical is that they are spread sparsely, and sometimes they're geologically isolated, and sometimes carefully controlled or difficult to extract. Historically, some of these elements were difficult to distinguish from one another, so we didn't always even know that they were different because they were found in the same ores in nature. And they're difficult to separate because they have similar appearance, density, melting points, and reactivity. They have applications in everything from computers to auto components to different types of lighting to glass and optical properties specifically in glass. They're used in catalytic converters, which is why there's been a huge uptick in theft of those items from vehicles. Keep them safe. And they're also used in refining petroleum, wind turbines, steel making, batteries, which links to the environmental studies portion from another tip unit. And they're also used in medicines and medical equipment. And in the luxury sector, we have our precious metals like gold. They're really crucial for sustainability, and students are going to be examining the issues of use and reuse throughout everybody's units. Especially lithium, cobalt, lanthanum, and nickel are used in rechargeable batteries. So that's the alternative energy source of the future. Because right now we're using fossil fuels, and those dangerous greenhouse gases are destroying our planet. However, the critical metals themselves have sustainability issues because recycling is very systematic. We don't do it very well here, and it's not always done well elsewhere. It's a pretty expensive process too, because a lot of it needs to be done manually, but we are developing better separation methods for the future. One of the easiest ways to be sustainable with critical metals is just to reduce our consumption. Also, we were examining environmental and geopolitical impacts. So right now, with the way we mine them, we are doing a lot of toxic leaching into the environment. And one way to stop that from happening is by trying to control the process. And we are trying to also develop better extraction methods. But not everyone has the same standards for containment. And since a lot of this is done in China, they have different regulations than we do, we have to really look at what the future of this is going to look like. Industry leaders in America need to weigh cost versus profit. Oops. So when we're buying from China, that might sometimes seem like an easier option than starting up our own industries here. And that's it in a nutshell, what we were learning about this year and what our students are going to be learning about with their own metals.
Great, thank you, Ariel. And just a couple of observations. One, you mentioned you were an art teacher, and I think it's great that one of the things that TIP promotes is integration of knowledge and cross-disciplinary thinking. So we frequently have art teachers or English teachers in a science seminar, and people have found very creative ways of combining very different sorts of content. And the other thing I want to say is that after this session, I'm going to be going out to the street and checking my Honda to see if the catalytic converter is still there. With that, I'd like to introduce the next seminar. It's Topics in Environmental Health, and that was led by Marilyn Howard, Adjunct Associate Professor of Pharmacology at Penn Medicine. The coordinator was Anna Herman from the U School, and delivering the presentation will be David White from John Marshall Elementary School.
All right. I was about to say good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. My name is David White. I work at John Marshall. I am the kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade science prep teacher. And so I teach the whole school, which has its ups and downs. I have been working there for 3 years. Yeah. And I guess this would be like my 5th year teaching. So in topics in environmental health, we covered a whole lot of things that are wrong with the world. Oh my God. It would kind of get like a little depressing sometimes, but then we would talk about ways that we can fix it. And then we're like, okay, there's hope, right? So air pollution, lead levels, water pollution, specifically water runoff, and where does our sewer go to, sewer combined, sewer overflow, the trash that's all around, pesticides, kind of infiltrating into our food. If we use it just around our areas, for lawn control, what that might do, asbestos abatement, oil spills. I didn't really think about that, oil spills that happened 10 years ago could still have effects. Oh my God, diseases due to this, especially a whole bunch of cancers, lung cancers from industrial workers working on asbestos abatement or asbestos installation. So just a whole lot of issues. But then trying to think about how we could solve them and how we could fix those issues really got us to what our students could do. And a big theme that we saw in a lot of our discussions was how could students be more aware of what was happening around them? And what could they do about it? Could they test their own water? Could they look for asbestos in their schools or in their own homes? Could they go down and look at the pipes in their basements? And they can. And with a little bit of funding, you can buy water testing strips, and you can buy lead stuff, and you can buy pH strips. And so we got a lot of these resources. We got city and county data that could help with this, and like a lot of online modeling tools for like water systems and like water treatment plants, which is really cool. So the three big themes that kind of stood out with all the units that were combined were focusing on like water pollution, air pollution, and the soil pollution. Specifically, water pollution really stood out a lot. And so with all of that, the biggest kind of teaching strategy that we talked about was this like phenomena-based learning, or kind of like a problem-solving idea. And I love phenomena-based learning. I think it's really cool. The district is moving towards this as well. And so basically it's this idea that you give the students something that is like new to them, or that they can't explain particularly. So in one example, the phenomena might be like water running, like running water. How does that happen? Like when we turn on a faucet, that is a thing. And that's not true in other places in the world. And that hasn't been the truth for like history for a very long time. That's a very modern thing. And so like that, how do we explain that? So you start, and students kind of create their own explanation without any backstory, anything. Then they share that out with each other, and they come to like a consensus on like, okay, what do we as a class think this can be? Then they start asking questions, and the teacher with a little guidance kind of takes those questions and gears them toward whatever experiments or activities that the teacher has planned in advance that will kind of guide them towards this explanation of, let's say, how water gets there, which would be like the water cycle, and water, you know, moving through the air and coming down through the mountains and coming through the rivers, and, you know, getting to the water treatment plant. And then we get into like cleaning the water, and then water runoff and water sewage. And there's so many different things that can be combined with that. After all of those activities, after each activity, they kind of go back and they look at their consensus model, like, do we have any new information? Can we change this? And by the end of all of that, they have basically explained a new thing in the world that they didn't have before. And so for water pollution or air pollution or soil pollution, all of these different problems that we have in the world, they can start to figure out ways to solve them. And they can use, you know, phenomena-based learning, problem-solving learning. And something that Edward kind of pointed out from the last unit, which is really cool about last seminar, which is really cool about the combination of different subject matters. One of our teachers, it was geared her units to 3rd to 6th ELA and science. And part of it was investigating the history of water treatment and the distribution around different neighborhoods. And I thought that was super fascinating to look at, just like, okay, has water been fairly treated through different neighborhoods? And what are the impacts of that? And what does that mean for our students? What does that mean for us today? Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, and so a lot of this ends with the students, you know, building something or doing something that could be cleaning their own water. So like building their own water filter, or creating like a watershed model that really explains it and shows it to them. They could even like write a story that of like a water droplet, and, you know, Mr. Water Droplet, Miss Water Droplet, Zay Water Droplet, and there's how it gets up to the clouds and down again, and where does it go? Yeah, so that is pretty much in a nutshell what we covered in our seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, David. The last seminar is Southwest Native American Culture, and that was led by Lucy Fowler Williams, Associate Curator and Senior Keeper of American Collections at the Penn Museum. And she was assisted by Shondine Brown, Henry Luce, Curator and Fellow for Native American Art at the Rhode Island School of Design. The coordinator of that seminar was Allison Marzoli, from the Academy of Palumbo, and Allison Aubrey from Crossroads Accelerated Academy will deliver the presentation.
Hi, yes, let me share my presentation that I made. Okay, so first off, hi, I'm Allison Aubrey. I'm the art teacher at Crossroads, which is an alternative education school. And Edward asked us to talk about like why we are teachers and whatnot. And I started out just loving art in high school. It was an outlet for me. And before coming to Philadelphia last year to teach and start an art program at Crossroads, I was a teacher in Boston Public Schools for 7 years. And we had a program very similar, but it was called Teachers as Scholars. And I was really excited to see that Philly had sort of its own version, which is why I was so excited to join. And I will be posting my lesson on my art teacher page if anybody wanted to follow. I'm doing pottery with my students, so I put my handle down there. But to begin, our content was Southwest Native American culture and art with Dr. Lucy Fowler Williams and Shondine Brown. And thank you, Allison, for being a great teacher, leader, and representative for our group. So for our class, we started out each day with a warm-up where we would look at an artifact or a work of art and we would draw. We would draw for a period of like 10 minutes, but for time today, I was gonna ask everybody to look at this piece and kind of get the feel that we had in our seminar and draw anything you want as you're looking at this. You don't have to be an artist or good at art. And if you don't have anything nearby to draw with, then you can feel free to write what you think in the chat about this piece. So I have a little timer on the presentation. So I'll set it right now for 2 minutes and you can just write your thoughts on the piece or just draw what you see or feel. Winding down. So you can feel free to show yours on the screen, but we also took some screenshots of what we did in our class, which I'm sharing. Oh, I love it. Really nice job, everybody. So this is a warm-up activity we did that Lucy had us do, and it was just a really great way for us to start looking at the Southwestern Native American art and just kind of get our feelings out on paper. So thank you for participating. Here's a list of all the teachers that participated. So you can see it wasn't just art teachers. We came from all different backgrounds and it led to really great discussion and cross collaboration. And we got a lot of great ideas from each other. So our next activity is I'm gonna read out loud sort of what our thoughts were about Native American culture and history prior to taking this class and what our thoughts are now. And if you either agree with it, you can write in the chat like, oh, I also thought that, wow, I did not know that, or I used to think that too. So some of our thoughts were, I used to think that copying imagery from another culture shouldn't be done. Now I think that teaching about the meaning of cultural symbols and art forms is how meaning and understanding are brought to the learning. I used to think that learning in ELA, ELL classes should be rooted in reading and writing. Now I think studying visual crafts and observing are integral to building ideas, slowing down and learning. Using visuals is an important starting point. I used to think Native American crafts were more in the past. Now I think Native American crafts are currently being created and are a part of modern life. I used to think stick to the script when teaching about Native American people, stick to the curriculum as to not offend. And now I think include diverse authors and viewpoints, expose students to more materials and resources of Native peoples, build diverse sources into learning about Native people. I used to think Native American culture was totally foreign to mainstream American culture. Now I think that's true, but there is a lot of crossover. Native American families watch television, worry about their individual identities, and express themselves through art. I used to think that Native American art was created in the past as if the culture no longer existed. Now I know that the Native American art community is alive and has evolved with all the modern times, yet still holds to the traditions, beliefs, and stories. I used to think that a broad knowledge of culture was enough to share with my students in order to give them an appreciation of another culture. And now I think that a broad knowledge does a disservice to the specific groups and individual people for whom the meaning of different cultural elements exist. I now think that to learn about a specific group and a specific aspect of that culture can help students build a connection that is more meaningful and representative of the culture. I used to think that I always had to focus my students on the finished product. Now I think that we can focus on the process. I used to think that I had to be an expert on a topic to teach it to my students. Now I understand that I do not need to know and share everything about a topic for my students to learn. I simply need to provide them with the opportunity to experience different things and learn from them. I used to think that Native American art was all passed down ancient tradition that did not change. And now I understand that the art is more alive and is changing along with the people as time goes on. I used to think that I did not know there were enough about Indigenous culture or tribes to teach them about them with anything more than a description of events and a judgment of the action of whites. Now I think having some specifics and anchors about Pueblo and Navajo points of view and cultural values, especially as a thriving and striving people who are making their stake in today like everyone else, will help ground my students in seeing things from multiple perspectives and care more about folks they can attach the human experience to as they still learn about the events. So as we're getting close to the end of the time, I just wanted to show you some of the art that we looked at in class. We talked a lot about what symbols could mean, what certain colors are used. My particular unit was on Pueblo pottery, and I learned a lot about how they use materials that were close to where they are living. So that's why the clay and colors are certain shades. And then another important thing that we learned in class is including current and past Native voices when showing their art. So I have some quotes in there and some more images that we saw in class. And then lastly, because now it's 5:30, so I'm sorry, guys.
No worries.
Okay.
If you need to take a few minutes, go ahead.
Okay. But what we learned when we looked at this art is this was really, actually, I thought this was really cool. And I use this in my lesson, is that the symbols and designs on Southwestern Native American Pueblo pottery were used to represent blessings for the community and for the world. And then, for example, because of the dry climate, symbols of water, crops, flowers, birds, and other nested symbols were used to represent healthy crops and good fortune to the land and to the people. And then these are the types of projects that we're doing. So we're going to be doing Navajo inspired weaving, Pueblo inspired pottery, poetry project, understanding Pueblo traditions, creating displays of artifacts, and comparing traditions to our modern living world. And then I wanted to let everybody know, because I'm really excited about this, is that Dr. Fowler was talking about an upcoming exhibition that she helped work on at the Barnes Foundation, which is going to be in February. If I'm Dr. Fowler, you can tell me if I'm incorrect about that. So you can actually see some of the artifacts and pieces that we discussed and looked at. And that's all.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison, for that beautiful presentation.